Hello. The next part of this chapter, right after red blood cells, is going to talk about white blood cell function. Now, I already kind of gave you nuts and bolts of the white blood cell production and functions in that video 19B. However, I thought I would just go through this really quick one more time on the PowerPoints, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So remember, white blood cells are going to be immune cells. So we have various types of them. There's 6 different categories of white blood cells. They all are involved in your immunity. We call white blood cells, remember, leukocytes. So leukocytes are white blood cells. All right. So we have erythrocytes, red blood cells, thrombocytes, platelets, and then leukocytes are the white blood cells. Now they're categorized into 2 categories that I told you before. 3 of them have little grains, little protein grains within their cytoplasm. They're called granular. And then we have 3 different categories of leukocytes that don't have those little grains, and they're called agranular. So leukocytes are a lot different than red blood cells. They have a nucleus, they have organelles, they also have surface proteins so that they can be used to recognize each other in the immune system. We call that a major histocompatibility antigen. These are antigens that are on the surface of the cell. So if I have a cell here and I have a surface antigen that can be recognized by the body, all right? And so this is how the body tells itself from a foreign invader like the coronavirus, because the coronavirus isn't going to have the same histocompatibility antigens as our own cells do. So our immune system can recognize that and then attack that foreign invader. Not to get too ahead of myself, but when a person has an autoimmune disease, what's happening is a mistake with this. So our body with an autoimmune disease like lupus, for example, is that we don't recognize that major histocompatibility antigen, and our body attacks our own cells because it thinks it's a foreign invader. So that's just a brief explanation of that. Now with white blood cells, I just mentioned that they have organelles and they have a nucleus. We have far less white blood cells in our circulating bloodstream than we do any other type of cell. So there's only 5 to 10,000 per drop of blood. If we have too many white blood cells, it's called leukocytosis. So if you have an infection, you may boost up that number of white blood cells. If you don't have enough, that's called leukopenia. And many different things can cause that, from radiation exposure to different leukemias and that kind of thing. Now, white blood cells don't like to hang out in your bloodstream. So it says only about 2% of your total white blood count is actually circulating in the blood. The rest are moving out somewhere else. They're in your spleen. They could be in your liver. They could be in your lymph nodes, your lymphatic tissue. They could be in the tissues of your cells, or the tissues of your body, I mean. They could be in a whole bunch of different places. All right. So we don't have a lot circulating in your blood. If you took a blood smear and looked at it under a microscope, you wouldn't see very many white blood cells. You'd see a lot of red blood cells, but not a lot of white blood cells. Okay, so the function of white blood cells is to emigrate through our body. That means leave the bloodstream and go fight foreign invaders. Some white blood cells, like I mentioned, neutrophils and macrophages, they undergo a process called phagocytosis, where they eat foreign invaders, right? So phagocytosis is cell eating. And if we eat the foreign invader, we can eliminate it as a pathogen. So these two types of white blood cells are going to undergo phagocytosis. They are also chemically attracted. Remember, we talked about these things called cytokines. Cytokines can signal these white blood cells to find a foreign invader and eliminate it. So we get these cytokines as their chemical signalers. We call the process of the chemical attraction chemotaxis. Chemotaxis is just that process of the cytokines alerting and communicating with other white blood cells. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have two different kinds of white blood cells. Granulocytes are the neutrophils. So these guys that have little grains in their cytoplasm, they are the neutrophils, the esinophils, and our basophils. Remember, basophils were also called mast cells. They categorize these cells called mast cells as a type of basophil. I think they're saying they're two different things now, but essentially a mast cell is a basophil cell, but a mast cell is going to be embedded in your tissues. So, for example, you have mast cells in your skin right now, so they're embedded in your tissues, whereas basophils can sometimes move around and emigrate somewhere else. And then we have our agranulocytes that are going to be our monocytes. Remember, those turn into macrophages. And then our T and B lymphocytes. So there's still three here because we're going to consider T cells and B cells as two different things, although they're both considered lymphocytes. So the granulocytes are neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Our agranulocytes are going to be monocytes, and then our T lymphocytes and our B lymphocytes. All right, sweet. Okay, so the next couple slides just talk about each of these different white blood cells specifically. So all you're going to have to know in this class is their functions. All right, so I'm just going to go through this really quickly so that you hear it again. If you want to, you can refer back to handout 19B. All right, I also explained it there as well. So neutrophils are going to be our first responders. I like to consider or kind of think of neutrophils as being the Marines. They are the first to hit the beaches fighting the pathogen. They also form that nasty pus. Because they are fighting an infection, they are phagocytizing and eating the pathogen, but it's also killing the neutrophils. So when you look at pus is that yellowish, nasty, kind of whitish substance in your infected wound, and it's made up mostly of dead neutrophils. So just think of those neutrophils, they're landing on the beaches of infection, they're storming the beaches, they're attacking that pathogen, the pathogen is fighting back, the neutrophils are phagocytizing and eating the bacterial foreign invaders, and then they're dying as well. So that pus is just the rotting dead corpses of all those neutrophils that sacrificed their life to keep you from getting an infection. So, we should honor them. Now, neutrophils are the number one most common circulating white blood cell. So, 60 to 70% of cells, white blood cells that are in your bloodstream are going to be neutrophils. So, if you look at a smear under the microscope of blood and you find a white blood cell, chances are it's a neutrophil. Okay, the next one is the esinophils. And I really don't want to talk a lot about these except to say that esinophils are going to be associated with attacking parasites. So if you get a parasitic infection like malaria, or if you get a parasitic worm infection like a tapeworm, you're going to be producing esinophils that are going to be trying to fight off that infection. Now, they are also associated with allergies. And if you have certain types of allergies, your body may mistake a allergen as a parasite. And so then your eosinophils are going to attack that allergen like it's a parasite. And this can cause a huge problem. This is a very serious allergy that we call anaphylaxis. So if a person's going into anaphylactic shock, this is associated with that. Now, typically we don't have parasitic infections, so you don't see a lot of eosinophils in the circulating bloodstream, just 2 to 4%. All right. Then we have basophils or mast cells. Basophils and mast cells, their main function is to invoke inflammation. So they're going to be causing the inflammatory response. So when you have inflammation, you're going to have redness, swelling, pain, loss of function to that damaged area. That is caused by these basophils and mast cells. Basophils and mast cells release a blood thinner called heparin, which allows for a lot of blood flow. That's why that injured area turns red and can swell up. It's extra blood going to that area. Now, inflammation is not a bad thing. We actually need inflammation to help with the healing process because it recruits those other cells like neutrophils and macrophages. It's going to recruit those cells, all right, to that area to fight off the infection. However, basophils and mast cells can go a little bit overboard and cause some allergies of their own. So, for example, like seasonal allergies. Seasonal allergies can be caused by these basophils. And that makes sense when you think about it because you've got, when you have an allergy attack, what happens is these basophils and mast cells, they mistake the allergen for something bad like a bacteria. And when that happens, they're going to cause all this inflammation. And that inflammation is going to give you your seasonal allergies. So one of the major functions of allergy medicine is to knock down the either the inflammatory response, so we try and turn off that inflammation, or we inhibit the basophils so that they cannot cause the inflammation. We hardly ever see any of these guys in the circulating bloodstream. All right, they are usually in tissues, so they're going to be in a tissue doing this job of causing inflammation. All right, so I wrote that they're found in the tissues. Okay, now our other categories are the agranulocytes. The most common agranulocytes we're going to have are T cells, B cells, and monocytes that turn into macrophages. So our lymphocytes are agranular. They don't have any grains in their cytoplasm. And we have two categories. We have T cells and we have B cells. Now, for this class, I'm going to keep this really simple because we don't have time to go into all the different types. But these T cells are a group of cells. So I gave you some examples: cytotoxic T cells, natural killer cells. We have T helper cells, T suppressor cells, T memory cells. This is a group of cells, and you'll learn all about them in A&P2. But the T cell's primary function is to attack viruses. So if a person gets the coronavirus, it's going to be their T cells that are going to be really fighting off that virus. All right. Neutrophils and macrophages can also help with viruses, but these cytotoxic T cells, this one group of cells that are T cells, attack viruses. They also attack tumor cells. They, in a simplified version of this, they actually don't attack the virus specifically. They attack the cell that is infected by the virus. That's why they're very good at fighting tumors and virally infected cells. All right. So you can just think of T cells. I try and imagine them sort of as they are the Navy SEALs, right? They're going to go in, they're going to go eliminate Osama bin virus, eliminate it, get rid of it, and there's going to be some collateral damage. They're going to have to kill some of our own cells to get rid of that virus. Once they kill the viral cell, then other white blood cells like macrophages can come in and actually eat the virus and get rid of it through phagocytosis. So it says that T cells identify an invader and eliminate a specific pathogen. Now, B cells are another type of lymphocyte, but B cells create antibodies. So as these T cells are fighting that virus is being tasted by the B cell, and the B cell is going to make our antibodies, and that's going to guard us against future attacks by that same virus. All right. Now, we do have some of these guys circulating in our bloodstream. So it says 20 to 25% of our circulating blood cells are going to be these lymphocytes. They all look the same. It doesn't matter what type of lymphocyte it is. They all pretty much look the same. All right, now the last cell is the monocyte. Monocytes are the largest of our white blood cells. All right. Monocytes are inactive forms of macrophages. Macrophages are the active form. So a macrophage has come across, it's found a pathogen, and it is attacking that pathogen. All right. So you can think of them as the same thing, I guess, except the monocytes just haven't found that pathogen to attack. Now, macrophages respond to inflammation. So you get a bacterial infection, the neutrophils show up, start attacking it. The basophils are going to say, oh gosh, I got to send out a signal. They're going to cause inflammation. These monocytes come a little bit after, and they're going to respond to that inflammation. So it says that takes about 8 to 12 hours for them to move to the sites of infection and start differentiating and attacking that pathogen. Again, there's not a lot of these in the circulating blood, anywhere from 3 to 8%. It just depends. Okay, so what these neutrophils and macrophages do is called emigration. I just want to show you this really quick. So it says neutrophils and macrophages phagocytize bacteria and debris. What they do is they move through the bloodstream to the site of infection, and then they emigrate. And so that's what this is showing us right here. So here you have a neutrophil or a macrophage tumbling along in the blood, all right? And it's going to attach to the inner wall of the blood vessel, and it's going to emigrate out and go into the tissues and attack any foreign pathogen. That's what they do. All right. So this is done through chemotaxis. So inflammation and chemical signals by cytokines are going to alert these cells to the site of infection. Pretty sweet. Okay. Finally, we have platelets. And I've already mentioned this again in handout 19B. But remember, platelets, what you really need to know is that our bone marrow makes a cell called a megakaryocyte. And this megakaryocyte is going to fragment and form a bunch of little platelets. These platelets are going to be involved in blood clotting. Now, in any given blood drop, we're going to have somewhere between 250 to 400,000 platelets per drop of blood. So they're a lot more common than our white blood cells, but they're way less common than our red blood cells. All right, so here they are. It says they stop blood loss by forming a platelet plug. And they have a short lifespan. They only last somewhere between 5 and 9 days, so about a week. Remember, they're just fragments of cells, so they don't live very long. They have no way of repairing themselves or correcting any mistakes. So let's look really quick at what a thrombocyte or a platelet looks like. So they're little boomerang shaped little fragments. All right, so it says they're 2 to 4 microns, 250 to 400,000 per drop, and they're going to be responsible for blood clotting. Blood clotting is called hematostasis, and that's going to be our next video. So make sure you know the functions of each of these blood cells, all right? So you got to know the function of red blood cells, platelets, and the 6 categories of white blood cells. All right, until the next video, take care, stay healthy.